Peace. So today's mathematics is understanding knowledge, which is the number 3. That's understanding. And 1 is knowledge. And I wanted to build briefly on the importance of being able to hold space for one another as it relates to understanding knowledge. One perspective of understanding knowledge is to see things for what they are based upon where a person is coming from or what they're standing upon. So understanding being seeing things for what they are, not what they appear to be, and knowledge being the foundation or the essence of what a person is actually standing upon. Understanding knowledge is the ability to be able to see where a person's coming from. And our understanding knowledge degree in our 1 to 36 asked the question, then what happened? And that phrase, then what happened, is a good procedure in some scenarios to arrive at where a person is coming from. Because sometimes people can get into a very long, drawn out conversation. You may not have the time. It may be a sense of urgency going on or a lot of different factors that won't really allow you to get into all of the finer details of what a person is striving to share in terms of their feelings and how they are articulating the situation. And the emphasis just simply needs to be on, okay, then what happened? Okay, so then what happened? So that you could help move them along to get to that point. That may be a good procedure in some situations, but it's not the best procedure in all situations. And I think us as males and as men have a tendency to overemphasize that particular procedure or approach when it comes to socially interacting with people. Where in our mind, we may oftentimes think that because a person is sharing something with us, that they're looking for answers and solutions. So the way in which our mind oftentimes works, when a person's telling us something, we just want to give them answers. And that can come off as brash, it can come off as dismissive, or even minimizing a person's voice because we're not really listening to them. All we're striving to do is to give them solutions and answers. That may be a good approach in some situations, but it is not the best approach in all situations because the emphasis sometimes is not on where a person is coming from. Sometimes the emphasis needs to be on the way in which the person arrived at that place. Now, what do I mean by that? Understanding knowledge, 3 and 1, has a bridge, and that bridge is wisdom, or the number 2. So between 3 and 1 is 2. Wisdom being the way sometimes needs to be the emphasis on how we interact with people. The way in terms of how a person is expressing themselves, what they're actually articulating, how they are actually articulating. And it requires us to have a sense of patience. It requires us to be an active listener. It requires us to be sensitive to a person's feelings because that is what they're expressing to us. So it's far less about what point a person is striving to make and more about listening to how a person is expressing themselves. And that may be challenging for us as males and men in particular because we are mostly hardwired to just get to the point. Whereas in some situations or scenarios, that is appropriate, but that is not the appropriate perspective to have in all situations. Sometimes we need to sit back and just listen to people actively and to hold space for people, meaning we provide room for a person to express themselves and how they feel, as well as to make space for them to be comfortable to share their voice. And it's not about us just giving them answers or solutions because that may not be what they're actually looking for. The emphasis needs to be on the wisdom or the way that this person is expressing themselves. You will eventually get to the point, but the emphasis oftentimes needs to shift. So I will that this was inspiring, it was empowering, and it was educational to get those of you some insight into sometimes that idea of then what happened. That may be an appropriate approach in some situations and scenarios, but sometimes the emphasis needs to be on the wisdom, the way that a person is expressing themselves and the way that they actually feel about a situation or a scenario, because you will eventually get to the point. And being able to hold space for one another is important in terms of rebuilding and restoring and validating relationships with one another. Because sometimes with that mentality of then what happened can come across very dismissive, indifferent, as if we don't care, and not really providing room for a person to be able to express themselves. So I took years to be able to learn this. years to be able to learn this. And I'm just sharing that with all of you as well. And willfully, when you look at the way in which we interact with our families and our community members, that we'll take a step back sometimes and realize that sometimes it's all about listening to the way in which a person is expressing themselves and how they feel in order to arrive at that particular point, and not just getting to the point. Peace.